Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sabrina. Born and raised in Montreal, Quebec. I come from a very tight-knit family. I have one sister who's 2 years older than me. I would say that my upbringing was a semi-religious one. I did spend a lot of time with my grandmother on my father's side growing up, and she was a religious woman. We used to go to church on Sundays, had catechism classes, so we did our, the baptism, the first communion, the confirmation, and prayed daily. So yes, I would say my upbringing was a semi-religious one. I do have a lot of memories from my childhood. Of course, like celebrating Christmas and Easter. There was always the Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny aspect of those holidays, and then you also have the more religious view of those holidays as well. And our family, we did celebrate the more religious views of those holidays. And I do have a lot of fond memories of praying with my grandmother, praying for our relatives that have passed away, also praying the rosary as well. I would say that I did happily identify myself as a Catholic at the time. We did read the Bible, we learned it in church on weekends, but I would say that I identified myself as a Catholic quite happily. My relationship with Jesus, peace be upon him, as a Catholic was a pretty strong one at the time growing up. I would say that daily prayers were absolutely important. I couldn't go to sleep without, praying that night, or else I would have like a guilty conscience. It just became like a habit that I had since, as I grew up, even as I became, a little bit more distant from the religion and, didn't attend church every Sunday as I got older. But I did always pray. That is something that I always kept as a daily thing. My views of Islam prior to converting, I was a teenager, of course, at the time, so I didn't really have a lot of knowledge of, different religions. I would just, the media did influence a lot of my opinion. I was quite ignorant to the religion and what it stood for and, what Islam really was. I just felt like it was something really foreign. Of course, I had, all the misrepresentations of the religion. I did have a negative view towards it based on the media and all the events that had happened. For example, the events of 9/11, right away you see this is a, Islam is labeled on this type of thing. So when someone's ignorant of the religion, you're going to look at an event like that and say, well, why would the religion condone this? Why would Muslims condone this? So for sure I did have a negative view, which was of course all misrepresented, but I did have a negative view of Islam prior, as a teenager. My quest for Islam really began when my grandmother passed away, because she was, the main part of me, of the, all the religious aspects of my life growing up. When she had passed away, I was a teenager, and like most teenagers, I was very, I did pray every night, of course, but I was very distant from the religion at that time. And when she had passed away, it was almost as though, the same way you get into a car accident and you don't really ask for it. It's like it forces you to wake up, because we're always postponing those thoughts of, what's after life, what is the purpose of life. And when you're a teenager, that's the last thing on your mind. Even though you might have, spiritual feelings towards, religion and God, of course you're gonna, you're too busy with your social life and such things. Whereas when she passed away, I felt like it just forced me to wake up and look at my life from outside of the box. And, I was, ashamed with what my life was at that time. And I felt that, I should be reflecting, in action what is in my heart, because I did have, a huge, spiritual side that I felt that I was always neglecting at the time. I came across the Holy Quran, not necessarily in a specific event. Of course, when I had decided I was wanting to learn more about different religions and learn about Islam in particular, of course I did look to the Quran. I did a lot of online research where of course you see a lot of good and bad, of course. So I did prefer books at the time. I was given an English version of the Quran, and this was all prior to me converting. I would say a good year and a half prior, and of course I read it front to back. And yeah. The particular verse that I would say that inspired me in the Quran was, the fact that there's a whole chapter named Maryam. Of course, as, coming from a Catholic background, you're like, oh, this is so familiar to me, and then everything that, specific verses that talk about the Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, of course, that, resonated with me, coming from a Catholic background, and the concept of Jesus, I would say, once I learned that from the Quran, I felt that it totally changed my whole aspect, my whole view of being a Catholic was totally shattered after reading Surah Maryam. My view of hijab prior to learning about Islam, I would see Muslim women wearing it. I would assume that they were, either forced to wear it, or, that it was some sort of, written in stone rule that, it's like maybe they didn't want to wear it, but they felt that they had to as Muslims. So, of course, I didn't really like the idea of anything that, where you're being told to do something. Of course, that's viewed as something oppressive, which, even today there is that misrepresentation still stands with a lot of people. They see a woman in hijab, they assume that, she's oppressed or she doesn't have equal rights. So, of course, I did have those same views prior, but, now, after looking into it, of course, I look at the hijab as a totally different light, a totally different, view, where it's very liberating, for a woman to wear hijab, and it's absolutely a choice. Whereas, it is written in the Quran. It is, all the things that's required from us as Muslims. There are written things, but there's no compulsion in the religion. So of course, these are the type of things where you would decide to do it for yourself, not because you're not convinced by it or you don't want to wear it. I would say the media did affect my view of Islam. I think the same way it would affect a lot of people that don't have any base knowledge of Islam. If someone's just, they see Muslims, they're not familiar with the religion, and then they're being told, all these atrocities are happening, in the name of Islam, or, people that are doing outrageous things in the name of Islam. Of course, you're gonna, without any base knowledge of Islam, to say, no, Islam doesn't, condone such behavior, Islam is against such behavior. Of course, you're gonna automatically assume that, Islam is somehow responsible for those actions. So the media does a pretty good job at propagating that image that Islam is associated with, so much negative in the world, but it's not the case. It's not the case. After learning about Islam, of course, you come to realize that, you're living in a world where Islam is so badly misrepresented by the media, by people, by Muslims themselves as well. And, when you're looking into the religion, it's like you're almost confused, because you're like, so many people are quoting the Quran to say this, Quran says this, or, do all these crimes, and you're looking at it and you're like, no, it doesn't, and then even Muslims are helping to fuel that ignorance, that hate, because they're saying, oh, the Quran says this, and, so you have like people misquoting the Quran, misrepresenting the religion from inside and outside, and I feel like all it really takes is that person to just pick up a book, pick up the Quran, and just read it front to back, and you won't find, what the media is, trying to tell you what Islam is. Don't look at the Muslims for your opinion on Islam. Pick up the Quran, which is, the root, the fundamental, book of Islam, of course, and read it, and you'll come to realize, that it's not the case. So the day that I officially reverted, that I did my Shahada, was the Mawlid al-Nabi. It was at a friend's house. She was having a get-together for women at her house, kind of like a small party, I guess, sort of thing. And it had already been like a year that I'm learning the religion at this point, and they had brought it up to me if I was, interested in, if I was ready in doing my Shahada, and without any pressure, telling me take your time, just. And of course, at that time, I was, more than ready. I had, had already learned, so much at that point. I had already accepted Islam in my heart. So I was just, I don't know what was, stopping me from doing my Shahada. I guess I was just scared to take that last final official step. So I remember I did my Shahada, and shortly after, 30 seconds it took to sink in, and I just sat down, and I remember just bursting into tears. And obviously not tears of sadness, it was tears of happiness, but even more so tears of relief. It was as though I had, as I said, I had accepted Islam, it had been already a long time coming, and just to officially say it out loud, to, do my Shahada, was just it was such a relief to just finally, make that official step, that I knew going forward from that day, from that moment, that I was going to be identifying myself as a Muslim. So it was definitely an amazing experience. And I remember, like, I needed time to myself. I went to like one of the rooms upstairs, and I had called one of my best friends at the time, and I had told her, like just like any other thing, when something happy happens in your life, you want to call the people that you love and care about, and you want to tell them the good news. And I remember telling her, and her reaction was like, "Well, what do you want me to tell you?" Like, which was definitely disappointing, but it also made me realize a lot in that moment, like about, how you can have like, brothers and sisters in humanity and brothers and sisters in faith. So from that moment forward, I was kind of like able to differentiate, my relationship with different people, which, I think it is important to have, relationship with all kinds of different people, but, you stand in different places with different people, that's for sure. My family's reaction to me reverting to Islam, alhamdulillah, they were more than supportive. They continue to be more than supportive. As I mentioned earlier, my family is very tight-knit. My family, like, I couldn't picture any better family to, the way that they've supported me in everything, from when I announced it to them, whatever makes you happy, whatever brings you closer to God, do whatever you feel is good for you. From when I started to wear the hijab, complimenting the way that I wear it, or, such things. And, if there was a party, like a cousin's birthday, or a cousin's, anything, where, there was going to be food served, they always made sure to look out for me, make sure that there's either fish or vegetarian option, or, and my aunt especially, she's amazing. Every holiday, it's always at her house, and she always makes sure to, to go to where I buy my meat. And, whether it's Thanksgiving turkey, it's halal. Whether it's like, a Christmas dinner, it's halal, no matter what. So my family is, alhamdulillah, like I couldn't ask for, more supportive family, for sure. I would say that the hardest thing, going from, being Catholic to, being a Muslim, the hardest thing to accept, I don't think there's anything necessarily hard to accept about the truth, just, coming to terms with it. The only thing that did take some time, of course, when you're raised, with a religion, especially with the concept of Jesus, it does, I did totally like switch, I didn't really believe in the concept of Jesus the way Catholics do from the minute that I learned the Islamic perspective, but it does take some time to, adapt to that idea, after being Catholic for so many years, and, looking at, Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, in such a way, and then having to change that. I would say that was, be maybe the hardest part, I would say. My first year as a Muslim was it's quite an experience. From when I did my Shahada, I was, you have to start reading the ingredients of things, making sure there's no gelatin, and, it takes adapting, it takes getting used to, of course, and then there was my first Ramadan, so I had to fast, for the first time. I was really excited about it. I had started to wear hijab at this time as well. I wasn't prior, only unless I was going to the masjid, so I decided to start wearing the hijab officially with my first Ramadan. And the first year, there's so much adapting. You learn so much about yourself. Of course, you're always learning more about the religion. That's something that never changes. But it takes time to adapt, for sure. I had quit my job at the time. You start to really see, especially with hijab, I feel like you're really labeled as a Muslim going forward in society when you start to wear the hijab, and this can be a challenge for some people. And I felt like at the time, I had to quit my job just because I needed that extra time to like really, grow within myself and, feel comfortable with my decisions and not feel like I needed to explain myself or, go against the grain per se. And, going to school, also everyone looks at you like, did you lose your mind? Like, what's going on? Like, you just come in with hijab one day and, of course, like, I didn't have the whole wardrobe set, so I'm like all mismatched and like just trying to, dress as modest as possible. But it's, I think having a support system is really important in the first year. Of course, I had my family, I had really amazing, friends, to help me, support me in these things. So, I mean, it wasn't hard, but it definitely